Hi, everybody. It's a nice, cold, blustery night here in Saskatoon. I want to welcome you to the Amnesys WebEx virtual town hall. Tonight we have with us Dr. Rebecca Major. She's a professor our assistant professor at the University of Windsor, and she completed all of her requisite via the U of S. And she's going to talk to us about the impacts on Indigenous identity, the HBC, and the fur trade this evening. So we're going to watch video first, and then we're going to have a question and answer period. And if you have questions, you can type them in to the chat, and then I will ask Dr. Major the questions. And I hope we all learned something.
Were other companies that sprang up, not just the Northwest Company, there was the XY Company, other smaller companies. But the difference with the Northwest Company is it was regulated out of Montreal as opposed to the Hudson Bay Company that was regulated out of London. And the Hudson Bay Company is the oldest and has always involved shareholders, or for a long part of its history has involved shareholders and that type of public transactions and who owns the company. And the Hudson Bay Company for a long time resisted intermarriage with First Nations people in Turtle Island, whereas the Northwest Company encouraged it. And so there were a lot of free traders and people that were mixed from the Northwest Company. Although myself, being from the Hudson Bay, not everybody followed the rules. And so they wanted something to do with the people retiring and wanting to stay in the country and keep their country wives. And my ancestor was offered retirement in Hudson Bay to be able to keep his country wife and stay in the country. And he was dishonorably discharged because he could not get the people in James Bay to grow gardens and carrots up in Bedrock. And he ran off to Vaudreuil, Quebec with his wife instead and forfeited the country pay, or the Hudson Bay pay. But one thing he did is he got the trading posts to start educating the children. So my ancestors were the first ones to work for the Hudson Bay that were Métis, that could read and write and were more than general laborers. They were clerks because they now had the skill set. Because even though it wasn't encouraged for the Hudson Bay to have these relationships, they knew it was happening. And so they did efforts to educate the children at the fur trade post. So many of the English half-breeds from the Hudson Bay ended up educated because of policies implemented, maybe this is why I'm a policy person, by my ancestor that said, well, these children are here, let's educate them. And they became more than just a labor force.
So your education and where you went to was, a lot of it was based on just your natural interest in your ancestry. And obviously you've done a lot of research into this area, and it's really, really interesting that there was policies put in place to affect who they corresponded with or spent time with and essentially had relationships with. And it's ironic that the Northwest Company took the exact same approach. So you were saying that your ancestor retired in the Quebec area from the Hudson Bay Company. So was that kind of a normal thing? Is that they would, and in your video you were talking about Lord Selkirk's settlement too, that it was, basically a retirement community as well.
And so the Red River settlement was created as a way to put these people that want to stay in the country and keep an eye on them so they wouldn't become competition. And for whatever reason, it's in the records for the Hudson Bay that my ancestor is supposed to go there with his wife, but he ran off to Droy, which is near the Lake of Two Mountains, which is not far from the fur trade posts. And some of his children who were working for the Hudson Bay, they left the service for a bit, but then they went back. And so I'm a Thomas, and some people that are related to Cumberland House would be familiar with the Thomas name. It's the same family. So my ancestor, Charles Thomas, he spent most of his career for the Hudson Bay in Western Canada. He was in Cumberland House. He was in a place called St. Mary's, which is near present-day Peace River in northern Alberta today. So we spent a lot of time there before being stationed at Lake of Two Mountains. Now, this is later on. He's ready to retire a generation later than this initial retirement settlement that started in Red River in the beginning of the 1800s. And he instead, the Hudson Bay said, okay, you're going to retire. We'll give you this post. So you're going to manage this post in your retirement. And they sent him to Golden Lake in his retirement. And so even though we spent most of our time as a family in much of Western Canada, he went and settled where the Hudson Bay told him to go. And he stayed there, and much of his family went to Red River, took Scrip in Winnipeg, and went up to Cumberland House. One of them married Alexander Christie in Winnipeg, and their child was the assistant to Alexander Morris, who got the treaty signed through Western Canada. And my partner, he's actually a descendant of the Northwest Company. So we tease each other sometimes, or I tease more a little bit sometimes, because actually he's also a descendant from Papa Chase. So my ancestor, my Métis ancestor working with Alexander Morris, well, not my ancestor, it was the nephew anyway, of my ancestor. But I tease that my family was on one side working for the government, being an asshole, pardon my language, while his family was literally on the other side of the table signing the treaty in Treaty 6 in Edmonton. But he comes from a mix where a lot of people in Alberta who are not connected necessarily to Red River because they're connected through Montana. A lot of Métis people in Alberta are just like people maybe in Cumberland House or in Isle of Cross. They were in their areas before Red River was an HBC settlement because of fur trade posts, or they went that way. They went via the American route as opposed to being tied to Red River. And so there's a lot of Northwest Company history too that's in Alberta. Incidentally, there are people who are Mohawk descent that took Scrip in Alberta that had come up through the American way. A lot of people that are in the Métis settlements are people that are connected to these American connections that came up and took Scrip. And that's part of the people that were part of my husband's side of the family and through the North worked with the Northwest Company and were Scrip takers in Alberta later. So we have lots of different pockets of different people that exist.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, how they migrated and how many miles they would put on, even with small children and, going by oxen and Red River cart or, horse and wagon, whatever. It's just amazing the miles that these families put on and how far they traveled. I'm just totally amazed. But a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the Métis did come through the States. They went down through the Detroit area, or went through Michigan and then over to the Dakotas and totally bypassed the Red River settlement. So there's, I know that on one side of our family, my mom and my dad are both Métis, and so we've got 8 lines that we go back on. But there was one that came from the States way. So it's really interesting to to see what, what goes on. Are there Northwest, somebody was asking this the other day, is Northwest Company records, are they available for viewing for people that are doing their ancestry? And I know HBC is, but is Northwest Company?
I'm looking for them myself, actually, because I want to do more research for the Northwest Company for my son's line, for his Alberta line. And I'm just starting to dig in to find out where that is. And it's not as easy as everything is centralized with the Hudson Bay Company. You just go to Winnipeg, everything's there. I did come across something for Northwest Company Archives, but it was several months ago, and I don't remember where it was, but it was trying to find. So my family was in St. Mary's near Peace River, but my husband's family ended up taking their scrip and settling or being in Lesser Slave Lake, Gruard. And I was trying to get the records for those posts, and I was able to find some of the original land records online, but I was trying to get to the actual original records, so it wasn't just secondary information. So I've been trying to find that, but I haven't put as much time as I wanted to. And some of it becomes more complicated depending too on religion. Right. So here in Ontario, so the original Thomas family, that is the root of the Thomases that all went to Saskatchewan. The original first line coming out of James Bay area, everything's with the Anglican diocese through the Ontario Provincial Archives. So it won't always work that way. It all depends. If it's through Catholic Church records, it's going to be through archdiocese as opposed to the provincial archives in different provinces and different things. And I just want to touch back actually on mobility for a second, because I thought about something when you were saying, people don't always think about how much we travel. And how much we travel, like really to go from Lake of Two Mountains, which is the Hudson Bay post in Manitoba, and be stationed all the way as far as Peace River, in northern Alberta. I think about a family that I traced when I was looking to prove Métis harvesting rights in Saskatchewan. And I traced a Métis family that was a Laframboise family that eventually was connected, I believe, to people in Posh. And I looked at how much life was spread out. So this family had, I don't know, something like 15 or 16 children. And I mapped where they were born with circles and where they got their christening with triangles, and tried to color code them and number them as best I could. And starting just, Red River area and going all the way down into like the Missouri Basin and all the way back up to the foothills of the Rockies and circling back on those big buffalo hunts. It was incredible, right? And there was one time that they had to stop because they stopped in Willowbunch because clearly the mother had a child. And 2 days later, that child was baptized in Batoche. And I was like, that woman had that baby, was in the back of that cart, like hours later. That's got to be the most uncomfortable ride. Red River karting, Willowbunch is practically at the American border, right? And you're going all the way up to Batoche in a Red River cart after just having a baby.
One of the questions, and I don't know if we want to get into this, is how is all of this was posted by somebody who's watching, how is all of this related to the discussions over who is Métis today?
I think about my elders, right, and the role that I play, and whether it's within my family or elders that are not my blood elders. Like I think about first, like my mamere from my dad's side, and it's like we don't tell other people how to live. And I think about things that my mom's mom, my Métis grandmother, would say, and it'd be like, that's not our role. We don't tell people how to live. We don't give people unsolicited advice. We don't do those types of things. And once I got into academia and I, started to talk more with some of my elders in the community because I struggled with some of the things that were going on in academia, that this is not your place. Like Frank Tompkins was one. He told me, this is not my place to engage. We don't tell people who they are and who they aren't. It's not how we do things, and it's not my role in moving education forward and things like that. Even today, like just this spring, you know, or over the winter, I reached out with the local community council here, and I said, you know, I would love to be able to volunteer more, especially now that I have my PhD done. And they're like, no, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're teaching people about us. You're creating understanding, you're creating connections, you're working in ways that we need you to work. And I was like, great. As for, I think that there's so much diversity even within what is central and western Canada when you look at the fact that there are buffalo hunting Métis people relating to themselves that way. There are road allowance Métis. There are people that are from Cumberland House and Isle of Cross. That their settlement as Métis people is much older. And what, you know, is happening in Manitoba. And we have to think about, you know, okay, the Sayer trial, Guillaume Sayer. He was not in Manitoba for very long as a free trader before he was arrested. He came from over by Mackinac. There was councils and governance structures set up all over in Ontario and different places. People have community understandings of self. And that's where I look and how I understand identity and how I position myself is in community understandings of self. Until I, you know, become an expert in someone else's community, how can I tell somebody who they are and who they aren't?
Really good point, Rebecca. I think a lot of it, what we've got to consider is just in the Cree community, there's the Woodland Cree and the Plains Cree. You know, there's differences just in the community itself.